We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate. Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. Now, for those forced to sit through the budget this week, one way to alleviate the boredom was to play budget bingo, looking out for those familiar phrases such as live within our means and fiscal responsibility. Well, we thought we could do one better. So, on this week's programme, look out for Carol saying that's what people voted for, me moaning about snowflakes and young people, Greg saying anyone who's been in business, Afua being surprised that someone agrees with her, and June reminding us she grew up on a council estate. Coming up on the programme, we're discussing the process of changing gender, how to solve the housing crisis, if tobacco companies should be charged with murder, and whether sex education should be reformed. But first, it's me. And time for a confession. No, I've not been making inappropriate suggestions to June. Rather, it appears I committed a hate crime at the weekend. Now, I thought I was just buying a newspaper that had an offer to save me about £5 on some Christmas wrapping paper. However, in the eyes of an arrogant, intolerant, self-appointed bunch of trolling activists, clearly with nothing better to do, I was perpetuating hate in buying that particular paper. Shame on the store involved in the promotion, Paperchase, for bowing down to such a small bunch of misguided zealots and rapidly issuing a craven apology. They're definitely off my Christmas card list this year.
Well, first of all, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you did buy the paper to get a reduction on your wrapping paper.
I bought the paper anyway.
Because I know you don't wrap your own Christmas presents, Nick Ferrari. Well, at the end of the day, clearly Paperchase customers don't want them to be affiliated with the Daily Mail. They're listening to their customers.
Well, let's explore that, Carol, because I wonder, the 3 to 4, let's be generous and say 500 people, I wonder how many were Paperchase customers, Carol.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think they've scored a massive own goal here. I think there was 4 million people who read the Daily Mail every day. I think many, many thousands of them will not go to Paperchase again. I won't. I will never go again. What you don't expect is Paperchase. I mean, what a bunch of gutless idiots they are. When I read that apology, it looked like it had been written by a 15-year-old teenager who had been told off by his teacher.
Greg, I'm going to bring you in. Let's just so that some viewers might not be fully up to speed. Yeah. So just give me about a minute of your time. This is how it all started. The paper comes out with this promotion. And Stop Funding Hate, the group that Carol says, quotes, after a torrid few weeks of divisive stories about trans people, is a Daily Mail promotion really what customers want to see from Paperchase? Hashtag start spreading love. Hashtag stop funding hate. And then we hear from various users. Wow, really disappointed my favourite stationery shop supports this disgusting hate-spreading excuse for a newspaper. An appalling decision. Thanks, Paperchase. These evil, hate-fomenting rags do nothing to enhance product branding. And I finish, Greg, before I bring you in. Well, this is what came from Paperchase within about a day and a half. Quotes, we've listened to you about this weekend's newspaper promotion. We now know we were wrong to do this. We're truly sorry. We won't ever do it again. Thanks for telling us what you really think, and we apologise if we'd let you down on this one. Lesson learned.
How is this a bad thing?
Great.
When I saw this story over the weekend,
did you think?
I thought, oh, God, I know what Nick's going to do on first. I was so certain.
Why on earth would you think that, Greg? I can't possibly.
I mean, it's not that you're a bit sycophantic towards the Daily Mail, but what I find interesting is, I mean, the numbers are small. The number of people who complained is small. So why did Paperchase do what it did? And I came to...
You mean the apology?
Yes.
Yeah, not the promotion.
Yeah. No, not the promotion. The apology. I came to the conclusion that actually they worked out that the 4 million readers means that there's sort of 50-odd non-readers. And actually, there's a lot of people... And Paperchase have just turned the story. Those of us who don't like the Daily Mail will now go into Paperchase. And I think there are many more of us than there are of you.
I think Greg has a point. I think you absolutely have a point.
But this group was citing... So first of all, they've been going on about immigration. And then suddenly they turned to the story of the moment, which is trans people, and cited an article by Sarah Vine, which actually didn't say anything bad about trans people.
No, but the whole point of Stop Funding Hate is about the general tone of the the Daily Mail's reporting, so it's not just one issue.
Strangely quiet, Afra.
Yeah.
I'm just enjoying this. It's absolutely hilarious, Nick. You're such a drama queen. The reality is, all publicity is good publicity. I completely agree. I actually am not somebody who's particularly passionate about the Paperchase brand, but I will make a point of going into Paperchase.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And you know what? I think, Carol, I think you're taking it a bit too literally, because I don't think this is because of one particular story in the Daily Mail, what Sarah Vine did or didn't say. I think Paperchase is a brand that sells fluffy cards and gift wrap and feel-good products.
Feel-good
Even people who read the Daily Mail religiously, looking at you, Nick, would not stand here and say the Daily Mail is a paper with a reputation for feel-good material. It's a clash of brands, and from that perspective,
shouldn't be involved in politics.
This is actually against the democratic process.
Yes.
How?
You don't, because listen to me. You don't have a right not to be offended in this country, as long as I don't say something racially motivated.
But that's got nothing to do with
Hold
this.
on, you have and we live in a rowdy and rambunctious West
That's
where
right.
newspapers can take certain rights.
Precisely.
You're not mandated to buy
That's
this
a ridiculous
newspaper.
thing to
No,
say.
it's true.
This
And
isn't about banning a political party.
At
This is
all.
about a marketing decision by a private company that was collaborating with the newspaper. This
And
isn't
saw
a
how,
democratic
Nick, one
issue.
moment,
These
saw
people-
how its customers responded to it being affiliated
handful.
with...
500 replies
Whatever.
to
No,
the
but-
tweets.
But that's what I'm saying.
500.
But for those that don't actually email in, you know that there's a whole slew of people who agree with that
That's why you do have to
viewpoint.
say, why did they do it? Because it was only 500. And therefore, I do genuinely think someone took a very smart decision and said, look, there's more Daily Mail haters than there are of people who buy it. So let's go for them.
This campaign has tried in the past to stop stores such as John Lewis, Waitrose and Marks and Spencer's advertising with the Sun,
Without
the Mail.
success.
Yes, John Lewis, when confronted, said, withdrawing advertising on the basis of editorial coverage would be inconsistent with our democratic principles, which include freedom of speech and remaining apolitical. And that is the truth.
This group champions itself as a purveyor of free speech, and yet it does everything. I just want to do a quote here. I've got a quote here from David.
Okay, Carol and I have your quote off. Carol,
It's deeply worrying that Paperchase should have allowed itself to be bullied into apologising to internet trolls orchestrated by a small group of hard-left corporatist individuals seeking to suppress legitimate debate and impose their view
All
on
right,
media.
my turn.
See you, Gracie.
My turn. Go on. Paperchase. We frequently trial new brand campaigns for Paperchase and have taken the commercial decision not to repeat this promotion following significant levels of feedback from our customers in store and online. Nothing about cowing to snowflakes or Corbynistas.
They've never advertised with the Daily Mail, never before. It is very disingenuous.
So my girlfriend's mum, right, who's a nurse, who likes to buy the Daily Mail, she's full of hate, is she?
No, that is not
that what I said?
that's
No,
what
no,
you
but I'm
said.
just positing this one. So she's full of hate, is she?
No,
she's not.
No, but
And
that's
these
not
people-
what
by the way,
not what anybody has
I
said.
persuaded my mum to stop buying the Daily Mail. It took me about 3 years. Well, because they were so rude about me when I was running the BBC.
Yeah, that's when I started reading it.
I know. They were so rude that I persuaded my mum to stop buying it. And the moment I left the BBC, she went back.
Yes, good old mum.
I would just say about the Daily Mail, you aside, because you're a special case, I think there are a lot of people who read the Daily Mail who don't do it because it makes them feel good about themselves. They do it because they can't help but look. It's very, the gossip stories in the Daily Mail.
Yeah, well,
the
we all go
celebrity stuff.
online.
It's completely addictive, and I think there are a lot of people who read it in spite of their better self.
It's also it's a championing paper. It actually launches. It makes great campaigns. Stephen Lawrence.
Yes.
Let me tell you about the Daily Mail when I was at the BBC, because the Daily Mail, we did a piece of research and we found that Daily Mail readers were more likely to support the BBC. And you thought, hang on, I agree with you. I think a lot of people, they buy the Daily Mail for what they think are the good stories, what they're interested in, and they're not Daily Mail stories.
Are you telling me you never read the Daily Mail?
I try actively to avoid. I
Online?
never buy the Daily Mail.
Of course you read the Mail
and
online.
I'm one of those people who occasionally reads the celebrity story and then hates
Mail
myself for
online?
it. Yeah, that would be the Mail Online, the female.
So you do read that?
I try
Yeah, of
not to,
course.
but
We all
I try
do.
not to, and there is a serious side to this. And I'm not a member of Stop Funding Hate or whatever they're called, but
Yet.
there are times when I think the Daily Mail has run stories that are a disgrace, like the attack on the judges, for example. I thought that was a serious violation of the principles of our democracy. Some of the stories stories about refugees and immigrants, they have real-life consequences for people who are visibly different, and I don't think
so.
That's
They
funny.
produce more than 300 editions every year, sometimes running to 88 pages, and occasionally they get a story wrong, as Carol said. Let's look at what they have achieved. The racist murderers of Stephen Lawrence, they've campaigned to stop plastic bags, more money being given to Grenfell than any other news organisation. Should we just bear that in mind?
I'm not calling for the Daily Mail to be shut down.
No,
but I believe in freedom of press.
I do pick it up occasionally, and I and I don't ever buy it, but I pick it up occasionally, you go through it, and I can say, that's a good story. That's a good story. That's a good story. No, that's a Daily Mail story. In other words, that's one the editor likes. It isn't really a story at all. And I always remember the Daily Mail reporter coming to, and I was at the BBC, coming to a press conference, and the Daily Mail reporter asked the question. I said, you know you've run that 3 times already. And she said, yes, my editor likes the story.
Well, there we are. Good.
Well, but the funny thing about groups like Stop the Hate, I mean, all the things that they rail against...
Stop funding.
Stop the funding. What did I say?
Stop the hate.
Yeah,
stop
the war. You're getting confused. Stop the war. Stop fucking...
You are a member of one...
Groups like this,
She loves war.
They never actually tackle the inequalities that they're talking about. All they do is launch witch hunts against people and destroy reputations.
That's what they do.
But what they're there to do is to raise awareness. And at the end of the day, Paperchase, as Afua said, it's a private company. They have a right to decide who they want to work with.
Buy in there
We're coming to the end of this. I just want to leave you with this line. In a television interview, the founder of Stop Funding Hate said, the end point for us is a media that does the job we all want it to.
Which is?
Now, for those of us in the media, you should be very, very chilled.
But what
with
is
sentiment.
that? He has to clarify
the train home.
He can't
Have it on the bus.
No, I need something to light the fire with.
Okay. Me next.
Yeah.
So, in our brave new world, a man could wake up and decide he wants to identify as a woman. If then, as a woman, she commits a crime and is jailed, there's a very real possibility she'll soon be able to serve her time in a female prison, even if she still has male genitalia. Even more worrying, the prison's ombudsman estimates there are around 80 transgender prisoners in England and Wales, and research suggests up to 50 of these could be sex offenders. So far, so scary, but it gets worse. Next year, the government is expected to make changes to the Gender Recognition Act, allowing people to self-declare which gender they identify as without any medical diagnosis. Critics say it could prove to be a pervert's charter, leaving no safe place for women from people born male. Not in prisons, refuges, toilets, hostels, changing rooms or shower rooms. All a man has to do to gain access to these places is say he identifies as a woman. And women are worried about this. Trouble is, no one's listening to them. This PC lunacy isn't just wrong, it's downright dangerous.
Carol, I'm glad you raised this, even though we've done quite a lot of transgender topics lately. I think it's an important issue. And I've thought about what you're saying quite a lot, and I think you're right. There is something that is really worrying, and that is when people are shut down from the debate. So I know personally feminists who feel that they are not allowed to express some of their concerns about the rights of transgender people to enter formerly female-only spaces. And I think that is something that we need to talk about, because this isn't going to work unless everyone is comfortable with it. And the problem I think that I have, I was trying to work out what exactly is my problem with what you're saying. I think it's that within the transgender community, there is a very small hardcore of quite extreme and very vocal people who are making life difficult for the vast majority of transgender people who are not going to end up in prison, are not sex offenders, do not want to storm into female-only spaces, but just want to transition so that they can live the life they deserve. And that's the problem, really, because when we get alarmist about how this is going to affect us, it does have the potential to affect all trans people. And 5 trans women have killed themselves in male jails in the last years. This is a serious issue. So we do need to do something to make it easier for people to transition into the gender they feel they should have been assigned at birth. And I also don't think it's right to characterise this as just being able to wake up one day and change your gender. I think what they're talking about is something in between the current position, which is very difficult to have your gender recognised, and a position where people can find it more accessible. So I think that we need to be a bit measured in this debate.
You know as well as I do that the current law says that it's you legally establish a change of gender over a 2-year period. And at the end of that period, you're giving a gender recognition certificate, which has been certified by a doctor and a panel of experts. I think that works really well. But the problem is, if you want to look into prisons, there's a woman called Davina Ayrton, who, when she was David, raped a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
She wants to go into a women's-only prison. Now, if these laws are changed, it's very possible she will be, even with male genitalia. There's another woman called Jessica Winfield who, when she was Martin, committed a double rape.
Yep.
She has had the operation. She's in a prison, but she had to be moved for sexually assaulting the other women in the prison. A man in Scotland actually had to be moved out of prison entirely, still had male genitalia. This is very dangerous for women, and while trans women have their rights, so do biologically born women have their rights too.
Carol, can I just add to this debate? I think I see where you're coming from, and actually see where you're coming from, Afua, and the trans community is a community that I have a lot of empathy for. And I think actually what we need is we just need better laws around transitioning. So we need to have a safe space for those that identify...
We have a good law
around transitioning. So we need a better space around those that consider themselves as non-binary.
In a woman's jail, if we've got someone...
I'm not suggesting he's going to commit anything. You're not hearing what I'm saying, Nick. What I'm saying is, for those that are in the transitional stage before they've actually had all of the operations...
Some of the men who've even had the operation are still committing sex crimes.
No, but let me finish. So my point is, at the moment, we have nothing to recognise those that are in transition or that consider themselves as non-binary. And if we did have that, we wouldn't have these issues.
Should it not just be?
Because for trans women, they do not feel safe in cisgender male prisons. They are treated differently.
Should it not be, June, that a person with a penis should not be allowed in any safe space?
But then why would you have a problem with a space for those that are non-binary and are in a position of transitioning? Because then that would deal with your issue.
About separate spaces for people in transition.
We're going to have trans-only jails.
Well, the thing is,
or spaces within our prison system that recognises that. Why would you have a problem with that?
I'm not suggesting any of the people that we've just named would do this, but you can't be so blindingly naive as to assume that a male prisoner wouldn't actually fake a transition just to get into a female jail for possibly an easier life. But please tell me that's occurred to you.
No, but if you're in a space of those that are transitioning, then that's not an issue, is it?
Would you answer the question?
You're not hearing what I'm saying.
But would you answer that question? Would you accept that someone who's a criminal
But it wouldn't happen because they wouldn't be in an only female space. They would be in a transitioning space, wouldn't they?
I think everybody would agree that we need some kind of regime that protects women and protects trans people. I think everyone agrees on that, and that's why the very extreme
and understands the process of trans as well.
Conning you.
Can I just, before Greg comes in, I know Greg wants to come in, but before he does, can I just show you what Justin Greening has said? Because, Carol, you mentioned that the current process works fine, and this is her explaining that she doesn't think it does.
At the moment, if you want to change your gender, it's a very complicated process. It's quite intrusive as well, and it's very bound up in going to see your GP and a whole medical process that then gets kicked off.
So there is a clear feeling. I mean, I've spoken to trans women who...
As have I.
...have explained that in order to transition, one of the perverse things is that you have to convince the doctor that you've been living, quote, as a woman. And that drives a lot of trans people into really regressive gender stereotypes. They feel they have to wear heels and dresses 24/7.
You're changing gender. It's a big thing. You should have doctors to
Gender is a social construct, and it's a spectrum.
Gender is a social construct. You're kidding.
Please tell me.
What sort of numbers do you think we're talking about?
Yeah, a
very
small minority.
Very small. And it seems to me this, I'm not going to be popular here, but as an issue, it is an issue, but it's not. This is about the third or the fourth time we've discussed it on this panel, and you do begin to wonder.
I'm boring, honey, but
well, I do think it's. I quite like. So I looked up what Theresa May said, right? Because
what did she say?
My idol. She said, "We're determined to eradicate homophobic and transphobic bullying,"
which is right.
We have laid out plans to reform the Gender Recognition Act, streamlining and demedicalising the process for changing gender, because being trans is not an illness and it should not be treated as such. Now, we'd all, I think, agree with that, wouldn't we? Yeah. So actually, what we're arguing about is actually on the edge, on the fringe of all this. It's not that coming from a Prime Minister is quite a major statement, really,
Okay.
compared to what it would have been 3 years ago. You wouldn't have heard that 3 years ago.
I get cross that women aren't being heard. You know Linda, you both know Linda Bellis, the left-wing thing.
Yeah.
She is in the process of being, she might be chucked out of the Labour Party because she made a speech about this last week saying that feminists weren't being heard. Listen what she says. If transgender activists inadvertently propose things which are in their interest but against the interests of those of us who remain women, I am going to say so, and I'm going to say it without fear because a lot of feminists are being silenced, and that's the point. And she also says, and when you're talking about danger, she and I didn't know this, but she says there's a fetish among heterosexual men who dress up as women and go into women's spaces, and she's saying that the new laws in this act could be a cover for them to do that. They just have to say, I identify as a woman, and they can go in there.
Well, clearly, no law's worth the paper it's written on if it can't protect women from that. And I agree. I am concerned. I've seen feminists that I admire be shut down for speaking, voicing their concerns. So I don't think that's healthy. But I also think that is not reflective of the majority of transgender people. At all. The majority of trans people are not trying to silence women and feminists who have concerns. It's a very small and very hardcore minority who are responsible for that, in my opinion.
But there are people who will abuse the changes in this law, not trans people.
But this is why
it
can be addressed by factoring in that transition period.
Right, it's me next. Now, in this week's budget, Chancellor Philip Hammond announced that he wanted to see an enormous increase in the number of houses built in Britain in the coming years. Noble plan. But the problem is, I don't know anyone in the building or development industry who thinks there's a chance in hell of it being delivered. There aren't enough skilled craftsmen around to build these properties. Local council planning departments are struggling to cope with the existing planning applications, let alone any more. And finally, the idea that there are plenty of existing planning consents just waiting to be built is unreal. Most of them haven't been built because the conditions placed upon them by the planners make them financially not viable. The problem with politicians is that when they announce things, like a plan for an additional 80,000 homes a year, they think just by saying it, they've done it. Whereas anyone who's been in business knows making an announcement... making an announcement is the easy bit. We can all do that. Delivering the promise is what's hard. Go on, Nick.
Do you know, you're absolutely right. And we're speaking on the day after the budget, and on my radio show I had the Chancellor on, and the call I took prior to that was from someone, and I wasn't aware of this, and I don't know whether you are, Greg, but this man was running a lot of carpenters in the Midlands. About 200, you heard that, about 200 blokes. And he said, I just can't get skilled craftsmen to do it. So I said, well, what about, you know, the Poles and the Romanians? He said, they're all going home. They're all going home, and we have not trained our next generation. So you're absolutely right. And I think there's another problem that we need to highlight. Because if you remember, the figure that really resonated with me yesterday, as in yesterday Budget Day, was the 270,000 pieces of planning permission ready to go to build these houses. Why? This is what's called land banking, and Sir Oliver Letwin is tasked to do another review, very much, as you say, Greg, if in doubt, call a review and then deliver in the spring. And in many instances, although the initial permission is granted, subsequently the local authorities can come in and there might be a change of use or they may want this. And you talk to builders and developers and they say, look, they say they've allowed it, but actually there's much, much more to do. So you're absolutely right. Politicians just... I do think we need to say all administrations are guilty here. It's not just this mob or the mob before them. It goes all the way back.
No, they genuinely think, politicians genuinely think making the announcement means it's done. And it's never done. I mean, the other thing is, the planning departments of so many local authorities have been decimated by cuts. So I've got 3 or 4 different planning things in different places, and I tell you, it's very, very difficult. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get them through, get them going, because actually, I've had them. I said we're too busy.
Sorry, Jim. Doesn't that need to be addressed?
You need to have more effective planning.
Absolutely.
You also, there's a lot of strange things, but the thing that stops an awful lot of development is bats. I should tell you that bats. Yes, there has to be. You have to demonstrate that if you're going to build this or do that, you're not disrupting the bats in the air. It's very expensive to do. But there's all these things. If you're suddenly going to say we're going to build loads more houses, you have to do much more radical things than they're prepared to do.
I think this Speaking of property, did I tell you I grew up on the council?
I know.
But anyway, what I was going to say is another. I'm not going on about Brexit, but I will do. Another thing that, in terms of Brexit being a disaster, is the skill shortage, because there is a crisis in terms
happened
of...
before that Brexit, though.
Yes,
it was happening
indeed.
before Brexit.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not a factor,
No,
but don't blame Brexit
No,
for
but
this.
my point is, what are we going to do when those Eastern European tradesmen leave?
Because we've got to train our own kids.
No, but the problem we've got is we've got double the amount of British tradesmen retiring in terms of those that are coming into the industry. So we're going to have to figure out how we get our young boys actually doing these vocations.
And girls.
And girls. Apologies, yeah.
This great big exodus. There was an investigation last week, and Office of National Statistics have brought out figures saying that no one's leaving this country. This year there's
Carol.
There's 112,000 more people here this year than there was last year from the EU.
Yeah, because Brexit hasn't fully happened yet.
But all you guys say every week, people are fleeing in their droves. In the NHS, people keep on quoting people are leaving in their droves.
My point is what happens when they have to go home?
3,181 more people in the NHS than there was at this time last year. There is no exodus.
Now it's not what matters. What happens after?
This debate is not about Brexit.
Right.
This debate is the inability of governments to actually make decisions like this and actually deliver on them. They just don't do it.
We all laugh at Greg for his being someone who's in business.
No, we don't laugh.
But I
We're
think
looking up to it.
It's really interesting to hear your perspective, Greg. And this is the debate I wish we had. Even the point about bats, which I didn't know. I think we are quite confused about what we want in this country. We have needed, it's been said by housing campaigners for the last 5 years, we need 250,000 homes a year minimum to keep up with existing demand. We've got a huge backlog because we haven't been building that. We need to build homes if we're serious about people having decent accommodation to live in. But at the same time, we're very ambivalent about building on countryside, about the green belt, about protecting wildlife. These are things that people care about as well. And I think the problem with the budget, like you said, is that politicians just come and say this.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's no sense of the work or the compromises that would need to be done for it to be pulled off. And we, the people watching, just don't have a clue.
I agree with that.
Everyone agrees with me.
Yes, we all agree.
I can't believe it.
It's only the urban part of Britain, right? 6.8%. And half of that is green. So it's actually 3.4%. The idea that we're never going to build on anything else just is nonsense.
I agree.
I remember as a young reporter many, many years ago in West London, there was a whole plan to develop Northolt Airport. Now, Northolt Airport's enormous, hardly used, and actually would make a great new town. I bet you that won't happen in my lifetime. Not a chance.
But before we go, let's just hear what Phil Hammond did say about property.
It cannot be right to leave property empty when so many are desperate for a place to live. So we will legislate to give local authorities the power to charge a 100% council tax premium on empty properties.
So, Greg, what would you do?
I do think you've got to sit down and have a plan, and I think you've got to take land. I mean,
He's talking about empty homes. He's talking about people with empty homes.
I think there's a lot of land.
Nick Santana, I've got
I mean, there are a lot of empty homes. How
many have you got?
How
many have you got?
Me, I've got 2 homes.
There you go.
But
You've also got a lot of development.
Yes, we're building a lot of houses.
It's politics. He's a successful businessman.
What do you do? You've got to take land that is at the moment agricultural land. You've got to take it at agricultural prices and turn it into housing land.
But Greg, you can't force Barrett's or Galliards or anybody else to build houses if they don't want to.
If they don't want to, you can incentivise them to. But I mean, if you go back to the last time we built this number of houses, 69.
In the 60s,
I mean, how many of them were council houses? An
I agree
awful
with
lot.
that.
An awful lot. Now, I don't think councils were ever very good landlords, personally, but I do think social housing you can't just build them to sell. You've got to build a great deal of social housing in this country.
Greg, so back to your point about politicians saying things and then pretending it's done. Here's a great example of that. Let's look at David Cameron in 2014.
We're going to build 100,000 new homes, and they will be at least 20% cheaper than normal. Wealthy foreigners won't be able to buy them. Just first-time buyers under the age of 40. Homes built for you, made for you. Our party, the Conservative Party, the party of home ownership, once again.
And can I say, Greg, not one of those homes has been built.
Even if they had 100,000 is a drop in the ocean.
Yeah, but also your problem in places like London and now Manchester is actually a lot of them are being bought from overseas.
Yeah.
And they're not even occupied. They're
Just the lower end, even the sort of starter low,
No, the higher end.
Yeah,
the higher end. But, the whole thing works on that.
Is it that we don't have a housing crisis as much as a population crisis? Our population's exploding. We have been historically taking in 300,000 people every year.
But it's
not
the
catering
price
for that.
that's the
No,
problem.
actually, as big a factor of that is the fact that people want to live alone. There's actually a fundamental change going on, particularly if people of, shall we say, of an older generation who decide they've had enough of the old man or the and they don't want to live on their own. And actually, it's people living. That's part of it. Yeah. It's part of it. It's population growth.
Devastated as I am not to be able to enter into the immigration debate at this stage, I'm afraid we have to change subject. It's my turn. You are watching The Pledge, and coming up next, I'm arguing that tobacco companies should face prosecution, potentially even for murder. Why do people still smoke? In the UK, more than 7 million people do. We all know smoking kills. The NHS says it's responsible for 16% of all deaths and almost 500,000 hospital admissions. Now there are calls for the Director of Public Prosecutions to bring criminal charges against tobacco companies. Some people argue smoking is a personal choice. The only person responsible is the smoker themselves. But is that really true? We know our choices are influenced by marketing and branding. That's why we've made cigarette packets look like a still from a horror film to deter people from taking up the habit. The products tobacco companies sell are responsible for the deaths of thousands of people every year. It's time to hold those who profit from killing us to account and even charge them with murder or manslaughter. It's about saving lives. What's not to like?
I don't know how you said that with a straight face. People choose to smoke. Yeah. People don't choose to get murdered. And people have known about the health hazards of smoking for the last 50 years. You talk about advertising. Here we have advertising. Smoking kills. If you hadn't read all the stuff anywhere else about how it's dangerous for you, this is a cancerous tongue. And this is on both sides of this fag packet. And it says, smoking causes mouth and throat cancer. Why would you carry? Why the tobacco companies to blame? It's not their job to safeguard the health of the world. Their job is to sell fags. It is an individual's choice whether or not they do that. They have the information. They make the choice. And you talk about charging people with murder. The British government is not going to aid that, or I suspect any government, because people's addiction to smoking brings in massive taxes, £12.5 billion worth of taxes to this country every year. 80% of every fag packet is taxed. So the government get that.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it would be easy to pin a murder or manslaughter charge on a tobacco company. But it's interesting because one of the things you would need to prove is that the company knew that the products it was selling could cause death. And when you look at that cigarette packet, actually, here is a company that openly says our products can kill you. But they're telling you, so you decide. And they're still selling them.
Do I want to kill myself or not?
What I'm saying is inspired by a case that's happening in the Netherlands at the moment. And the basis of that case really is not so much the marketing or the products, but the number of additives that are in cigarettes. 30% of the composition of a cigarette is additives, and the majority of those are designed specifically to make them more addictive. Mm-hmm. And that's what their case is hinged on, that tobacco companies are knowingly and deliberately putting products into cigarettes that make it very, very difficult for people to stop.
Make alcohol, you sue people, you sue sugar companies. It's all addictive.
First of all, Carol, I was wondering what you were doing.
I know, did you think I was waiting for a place
I thought she gave up. You yourself said in your intro, we all know that smoking kills, right? We all know. Yeah. So anybody smoking knows it kills, and they're choosing to. And also, I don't know how you can enforce this. As long as smoking is legal in this country, you can't bring about criminal proceedings. Well, I don't know how you did read your intro.
No, I spoke to a lawyer who specialises mainly in corporate manslaughter about this, and he said that while it... And as
It's a load of fun around your house, isn't it?
Yeah, we're looking forward to coming for dinner, aren't we?
Do make sure he or she's there.
Bring your
There's a
luggage.
blast.
Actually, before you come in, Nick, can I read a statement
Yes,
from the
of course.
Director General of the Tobacco Manufacturers Association, Giles Rocker, and he says, tobacco is a legal product and is subject to stringent regulatory controls and standards set by regulators in both the UK and EU. The industry takes its role very seriously and operates within those regulatory requirements. So what else?
I think this topic, I'm not saying that I think that we're going to see tobacco companies in the dock for criminal trials tomorrow, obviously.
Do you think they should be?
I think it is worth thinking about, and I can empathise with the anti-smoking groups who are bringing this, because there are two things I would say. One, I think that we are moving as a society towards a place we have different expectations of corporations. Look at the modern slavery bill, which now makes companies liable. Would you disagree? Would you disagree with the expectation that companies should be responsible for making sure there's no slavery in their supply chain? We have the anti-bribery bill. Now there's a new offence of facilitating fraud. No, but it's a climate where we expect more from our companies. That's the first thing. And just let me finish quickly, Greg. The second thing is, in the Netherlands, they found that just the prospect of litigation is actually affecting the way people think about smoking. So I think, and I hear you huffing and puffing.
I'll defer to Greg.
But surely.
But I'm coming in after this.
I mean, I'm one of these people who was vehemently anti-smoking back in the days when everybody smoked.
too,
You know, I wouldn't let them smoke in my car, my house, or anything. And I'll never forget the leaders of the tobacco industry in America all ended up before that congressional committee and all claimed it had no effect, that the evidence wasn't proved. Now, no one believes that now, and we should all say to the health minister in Ireland, who was the first person to ban cigarettes in public places, and which has dramatically changed it. But governments could take this decision. Governments could take the decision to say, we're going to ban this. These can no longer be sold.
Product.
Now, they've chosen not to, and I understand why, because in the end, someone has I don't think it is money so much. I think it is about the rights of individuals to do what they want, as against government deciding. I would spend as much as you could to get more and more people to stop smoking. I now look at people who smoke, and none of us smoke, do we?
No.
I now look at
some of us. I used to smoke.
Yes,
Carol used to smoke.
Can I just get involved here, because we're learning quite a lot about you on the offer, right? You are the journalist who wanted Nelson's column felled. You've told us that gender is a social construct, and you actually said they're making a profit, so they must be held to account. There speaks a true lawyer, of course. You can get a lawyer to take any case for £500 an hour. It is not a crime to make a profit.
Do you know?
It's good to make a profit. That's what employs lots of people and puts food on their table.
Come to terms with living in a capitalist society.
And it's
not good when you're making it at the expense of people's health.
Hold on, it's not illegal,
but you can't
providing you're a certain age, to buy cigarettes, and that is individual responsibility.
I'm glad you mentioned age.
I agree with you.
I started smoking when I was a teenager, and when I wasn't old, I was young.
Does your mother know your age?
My mum's watching, so I'm not going to say exactly how old I was, but she would be pretty horrified if she knew.
I think we know what's going on.
But on a serious note, 570 children start smoking in this country every day. That's 200,000 a year.
But
there are a lot
of adverts, because you can't buy a packet of fags now. They're behind shutters.
But the point that I'm making is, as long as it's legal, children will be doing it, and nothing we've done.
But then tell us what people thought of you when you were smoking. Come on.
Yes, Afua.
People used to say that I looked very good when I was smoking.
Yes.
It motivated me at a very impressionable, foolish age to smoke more, because I felt very cool smoking. A lot of young people.
What was that age again?
I'm really surprised you say this, because you cannot outlaw choice. You're a big believer, big pusher of choice.
No, but we should protect children. She was 15.
Your mother apparently has just phoned in. She found cigarettes in the bedroom aged 14. Can you? Afua's mum says that. Can you confirm that? I sense you're not denying it.
She was younger than that. She was younger than that.
Mummy heard.
No comment.
When I was young, you could buy two. You could buy weights. You could buy 2 weights.
Two individual cigarettes?
Yes, 2 individual cigarettes.
Right.
And you take them down,
Well, if you go into the developing world, in African countries, they sell them in singles for people who can't afford. And actually, it's really disturbing there, because a lot of the regulation that we're protected by now has made tobacco companies have to focus their profits on countries that don't have strong regulation. And actually, the rates of cancer and smoking-related diseases there are on a sharp increase. So it's an industry that peddles basically, as we all agree, in sickness and death. That's the problem.
Knows what's going to happen to them if they carry on. And it's not like it's impossible to give up. It's not. We've all given up. 500,000 people gave up last year, so it's not impossible to do. And if you can, I think people should have the right to smoke if they really want to. But you can't then try and blame the tobacco company of murder. They're doing it willfully.
But Carol, don't you look at? I mean, as an ex-smoker, don't you look at people who smoke and think, what's wrong with them?
I do. Yes,
I mean, why do they smoke?
Yeah.
I almost don't know anybody. I think I've self-selected my life so that I don't know smokers.
And we also all know stories of people who were dying of smoking-related disease who kept smoking
and still can't
until
stop.
the end. And it's tragic because they knew they were killing themselves, but they couldn't stop.
But by then, it didn't matter, did it?
Well, I mean,
that's what happens in the last few years of your life. If you've been smoking for 40 years, the last couple of years isn't going to make any difference.
Got nothing to lose.
I think we will look back one day at this time and wonder why anyone thought it was okay.
We're never going to
legally
back and
trade.
say that you were right.
We're never going to look back, and I will be on the right side of history on this one.
And on that note, I'll be up next, and I'm arguing it's time we rethink the way we teach young people about sex. This week, a new study argued that sex education needs to be brought up to date. It said we need to move away from condoms and cucumbers to more realistic portrayals, because in the age of readily accessible porn, we need to keep up with what young people are seeing and doing. I agree, our current sex education needs modernising, but I'm sorry, bringing live action visuals into the classroom in the most quote-unquote tasteful way is not the answer. Sex and how to perform it is not the issue. It is our emotions and how we behave towards each other when it comes to sex and relationships that is the problem. What we actually need is more honest conversations in schools about the minefield of sex and relationships. Yes, human beings are attracted to each other, so let's talk about how to address those feelings and urges appropriately. Sounds basic, but it's something we have yet to try. It isn't visual images that our young people need help with. It's expressing themselves properly. That is the problem. So sorry, Elvis. I'm saying a little more conversation and a little less action, please.
I'm really glad, actually, that my kids are all over 30 and I'm not having to bring up kids today, because I do think the internet and how many are seeing porn on the internet actually changes what they are and changes what they're about.
Yeah.
And I think we'd all agree with what you're saying. Whether you should show them, I don't know. What interested me when I was looking at these figures, more boys than girls watch pornography on the internet. Well, there's a surprise. You know, 59% compared to 25%. A greater proportion of boys want to emulate pornography than girls. Substantial minority of older children wanted to try things out that they'd seen in pornography. It's one of the great challenges, I suspect, of our generation, and one I'm not sure we have any idea how to deal with it, really.
And I think
that's why I think people are coming up with all sorts of ideas, because this is clearly a change from when my kids were in their teens.
Completely, and that's why we need to address it seriously, and I think the repercussions could be serious. You know, if you look at what's going on in terms of sexual harassment, it could actually get worse with the next generation if we don't deal with this. Carol?
You know, teens have access to porn now in a way that we never did. And I just think it's important that what has to be taught in schools, I think, is the difference between a normal sexual relationship and porn, because as you just said there, kids are likely to act out what they see, and that will become their norm. And the thing that worries me too is sexual imagery. It's everywhere. So boys are still expected to be this macho, dominant, strong thing. Girls are supposed to be these to present themselves as sexually available and there to please boys. That worries me, and I think that has to be addressed.
Which is why we need to look at boundaries and actually start having those sorts of conversations as opposed to showing
he was on telly
porn
with
in
this
school.
What's she called?
Oodala.
I mean, she had a massive joke-sized vagina on set, didn't she?
Yes, I hasten to add that was a prop, by the way. Yes.
I mean, but the one thing she said, people have to go home and touch themselves. And I'm thinking...
Well, what happened was teenage girls so she does a session and
take mirrors
teenage
home.
girls are obliged to take a mirror home and explore their their areas.
But that's
and
not,
teenage
that's not
boys,
something I have a problem with.
I think I do if they're young, depending on the age.
Teenage boys are meant to take home a shaving cream and a razor and continually shave their private parts, so then they experience what it is when women are meant to, whatever. So let's be careful how we tread, because this goes out in the afternoon, so we're careful where we go with this. So, coming back to what she said, my problem there was she also believed in things as saying what a possible pornographic experience might be, and also talking about any sexual experiences they might have had. Now, and this was 16, by the way, so there's nothing illegal, we must stress that. But, if I'm the one boy in class who hasn't yet, or I'm the one girl in class who hasn't yet,
the pressure.
and I'm going to put, and all the boys are saying, my girlfriend did this with me, and I did, and I say, I haven't done anything. Can you imagine the afternoon I've got ahead of me?
This is why I'm saying we need to look at the emotional side, because then young people who haven't had the sexual experiences yet actually can feel confident and safe to express that. So we need to do
you agree with kind of 5, 6, 7-year-olds being taught in schools? Because I don't.
It depends on what you're teaching them. Afua?
Nobody's suggesting showing porn to 5, 6, 7-year-olds.
No, not porn. No, I mean being taught
actually,
sex education.
the relationship education that's given to children that age is about knowing that their bodies are private and other people have no right to touch them, and that healthy relationships and boundaries. So I personally am glad that my daughter's learning that, because I think that children need to be equipped to know that there are boundaries and that they have a right not for people not to touch them a certain way.
Aren't you part of teaching her that?
Yes, of course, of course.
Is that not your job? Why don't you learn that in the classroom?
Yes, but it's too important, I think, to leave to parents. It's
you still,
fundamental.
you still need experts.
I don't think it's an either-or, and I agree with you, June, but I don't agree with you on the porn issue.
Okay.
Because I have listened to people who advocate showing porn in schools, and it's not let's just get a sex scene and blast it. It's what it is saying the majority of children by the time of 15 have seen porn. And actually, one of the things I'd like to mention that I find really problematic is that more of them have seen porn by accident than were looking for it, which is absolutely horrific, that our children who aren't seeking it at all are being bombarded with kind of explicit material, which I think it's horrifying to think that kids are finding this when they don't want to find it. That's what's going on. People who talk about showing porn in schools say, look, our kids are being exposed to this. How can we find a way of teaching them the context? Because a lot of them, when they see porn, they think it's real. They think it's actually what you do in relationships. They think it's a real reflection of gender roles and sexual encounters.
But then why can't you have the conversation without needing to show the imagery? Because actually they're watching it themselves.
Jude, it's probably like, I don't know what your sex education at school was, but it was a conversation without the imagery, which was this incredibly abstract lesson on these body parts that we couldn't see.
My point, Afua, is right now our conversations are based on the physical. And I think sex is such an emotional thing too, and that's not even explored.
I completely agree, but it's not either or.
If 59% of boys have seen porn before the age of 16.
So we don't need to show them anymore then, do we?
Or is there a way of showing it in a way that's subtle but also educational? And, I don't know, I'm not certain you're right, because I think we're dealing with something that we just didn't know about, really.
The porn debate in school, it's like analysing literature. It's showing them something and then creating a discussion where you pick it apart and you analyse it. And I think that is a tool that children need. I mean, obviously, no one wants to expose children who've managed to somehow avoid having seen it to this point, which is getting harder, to porn for the first time. But I think there is a way it could be done. I think it's understanding it's not about...
Don't you think you get into dodgy territory when you're dealing with religious parents?
Yeah,
I just think, I just think...
Isn't it dangerous? Well, if you show them and say it's bad, they're going to want to do it. Forbid kids something, and they're going to want to do it.
Can I show you all a clip? So I have a friend called Cindy Gallop.
I've
got a clip for you. The pledge is coming on at midnight tonight. I've got a friend, Cindy Gallop, who actually... this is her campaign. Let's have a look at her.
So, in an era where hardcore porn is more freely and widely available on the internet than ever before, and where kids are therefore able to access it at a younger and younger age than ever before, there is an entire generation growing up that believes that what you see in hardcore pornography is the way that you have sex.
So Cindy is amazing. So her campaign is called Make Love Not Porn. And the reason she set it up is because she only dates younger men. And so she found that a lot of the younger men that she was getting intimate with wanted very strange sex. So she was like, what's going on? And that's what made her decide to take on this issue. And she's been fantastic in actually... Yeah, exactly.
There's a study in Sweden, it would be in Sweden, wouldn't it? But there's a study in Sweden that suggests exactly the same thing. But not all the studies do, because there's another one here in Switzerland, which doesn't show that. So, but clearly something has changed in a comparatively short period of time. And someone has got to work out what you do with it or about it.
For the Orthodox Jewish family, for the very strict Muslim family,
for the Christian
are we going
family.
to mandate them?
No, you can't.
Well, we've had a situation where, until recently, where religious or other parents who don't agree can exempt their children. I mean, there are people who run sex education. Like I know someone who runs Muslim sex education classes for children that it's kind of appropriate in line with their faith and their values. And I think there is a growing understanding in a lot of religious communities that while they still might have quite conservative ideas about sex and relationships, they still want their kids to be equipped to navigate a society where children are being exposed to this stuff. And I think that nobody can opt out of that. If you live in this society, this material is out there. And I personally would like young people to be more resilient, because there's a gender dynamic as well. One thing I found really upsetting talking to a bunch of school kids about porn was some of them had seen the same violent porn, and the boys thought it was funny and the girls thought it was traumatic. And that difference in perception
a group of boys have just
really
been toughing
worrying.
it out there. I bet if you got them one-on-one. Because one guy can... If everybody else is ha-ha-ha, that's a bloke male.
But you are going to have to tackle the parents first, aren't you?
Yeah.
There is no way you can suddenly put all this into a classroom situation without explaining to the parents, the parents, why you're doing it.
I would think you need to bring parents along with you. I mean, that's why there's been this very contentious debate about whether you make it compulsory. But the argument has been won because there are so many reasons why children benefit from having good quality, appropriate sex education.
Nobody disagrees with that, but I'm sorry, wouldn't want my children watching porn in school.
OK, before we go, we've just got time for our own goal of the week.
OK.
Now, being a politician isn't always easy, we'd all agree that. So Richard Leonard, a Yorkshireman who has just been elected the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, must have been relieved to get a nice, easy question on his second day in the job. The question was, in football or rugby, would you support England or Scotland? He was asked. Pretty easy, you'd think, wouldn't you? Mr. Leonard said, I think if it's England versus Scotland, I do support England. Ooh. Every other game, I will support either Scotland or England, but I'm not going to make up something which would be inaccurate. I do think, what a brave man, you have to say. For that, Mr. Leonard, you win our own goal of the week.
Can I say, Greg, I think Labour's never, ever coming back in Scotland then, as long as he's there.
Go to the jungle.
Ruth Davidson can relax.
I always remember turning up in Scotland with the England team in the FA, and there was a big placard saying, the enemy has landed. That's how the Scots see things. And there's an awful lot of Scots who will support anyone who plays against England. So I hope you get elected, but good luck. And thanks for being so honest. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget, you can find The Pledge on Facebook and on Twitter. See you next week.
Bingo!